Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today's training on who are refugees and how do they arrive in the United States, understanding the resettlement process. This training is presented by Switchboard, a one-stop resource hub for refugee service providers in the United States. My name is Rishan Habte, and I am Switchboard's Program Officer for Economic Empowerment. I am joined by a co-host today, Rebecca Mulqueen, Program Officer for Learning and Knowledge Management. You'll be hearing from Rebecca in the chat throughout today's training. Today's training will run for 1 hour and it is being recorded. The recording will be posted on the Switchboard website and you will be emailed a link to the recording in exactly 24 hours. The webinar transcript will also be posted on the site in the following days. So first, let's take a look at some Zoom logistics. All attendees are currently muted. You can switch between phone and computer audio at any time under the audio settings. We welcome your comments throughout today's session. Click the chat bubble icon in the bottom center of your screen to open chat. Send your messages to all panelists and attendees, and we're all able to view your messages. Next slide. Under Q&A, type a question or click the thumbs up icon to upvote another participant's question. Okay. So I know many of you are joining us today because you have questions about the resettlement process, hiring refugees, and how you can help. We hope that many of your questions will be answered by the end of the webinar. We have a great panel of speakers today, and I'm excited to introduce a bit later on. While viewing, we are going to now premiere our new animated video, Who are Refugees and How do they Arrive to the US? While viewing the video, by the end of today's webinar, you'll be able to define key related terms such as refugee, asylee, and special immigrant visa. You will be able to describe how refugees arrive in the United States and outline key services in which refugees participate, as well as the organizations involved. We are now going to premiere our new animated video, Who are Refugees and How do they Arrive to the US? While viewing the video, it is possible you may notice a lag or some pixelation depending on your Wi-Fi connection. If this happens, please know that we will be sharing the link to the full video posted on YouTube in the chat and sharing it via email too. My name is Rishan. I'm from Eritrea, a country in Africa. My family was forced to flee to Sudan when violence broke out during Eritrea's struggle for independence. Ultimately, our family received refugee status and resettled in the United States. So who are refugees? And how do refugees receive the rare opportunity to rebuild their lives in the US? A refugee is a person who is outside his or her country and is unable or unwilling to return because of a well-founded fear of persecution. This fear may be based on race, religion, nationality, social group, and/or political opinion. Many refugees face the possibility of being killed if they don't flee. Of the millions of refugees worldwide, far less than 1% resettle in a new country. Some decide to return to their home countries, and some are able to integrate into the host countries where they initially sought refuge. But for many people, resettlement is the only option. For my family, due to the outbreak of violence, it was not possible to stay in Sudan or return home to Eritrea. The only path to safety was to resettle in a new country. The United States has historically been a leader in refugee resettlement. Each year, the U.S. President determines the annual refugee admission ceiling in consultation with Congress. The U.S. also welcomes other people fleeing persecution. These humanitarian immigrants include those granted asylum, special immigrant visa holders from Afghanistan and Iraq, and Cuban and Haitian entrants. Many organizations and agencies work together to keep the U.S. refugee admissions program safe and secure. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, or UNHCR, referred my family for resettlement to the United States. Resettlement Support Centers, or RSCs, are run by nonprofit organizations in partnership with the U.S. government. In our RSC interviews, we explain the story of how and why we fled Eritrea. Our family was also interviewed by U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS. It was their role to decide if we met the qualifications for resettlement. Throughout this process, we underwent rigorous security vetting, including screening by the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the State Department. Refugees are screened more thoroughly than any other type of entrant to the United States. From the time a refugee is first referred for resettlement, it can take many months or even years before they arrive in the U.S. After this long process, our family was determined to be eligible for resettlement. We were so happy to finally receive the chance to move to a safe home. But first, we needed to complete medical screening, receive immunizations, and attend cultural orientation. Once all overseas vetting is complete, eligible refugees are approved for travel to the U.S. in a process coordinated by the International Organization for Migration. Until this moment, many refugees don't know which new city or town they will call home. Refugees are resettled in states and communities across the U.S. Resettlement agencies are nonprofit organizations that are funded by the U.S. government and private donors to help support refugees when they reach the United States. When we arrived, resettlement agency staff met us at the airport. They brought us to our new apartment, which was prepared with basic furniture, household supplies, and food. Federal agencies coordinate with states to make resources and services available to newly arrived refugees and other humanitarian immigrants. The United States funds many initial services through the State Department. Others are funded through the Office of Refugee Resettlement within the Department of Health and Human Services. Resettlement agencies, state and county agencies, community-based organizations, schools, and healthcare providers all work together to provide these services. Local communities, businesses, and faith-based organizations also offer support, including by volunteering their time, providing donations, and helping to create a welcoming environment for their new neighbors. With help from our resettlement agency and their partners, my siblings and I enrolled in school. My parents signed up for English language classes, received work authorizations, and applied for jobs. Other refugee services include opportunities to improve economic well-being by building personal finance skills, increasing career readiness, preparing for higher education, and even launching small businesses. Refugees also participate in health and wellness programs, including support with accessing healthcare. Special services available to youth include family, academic, and mentoring activities. Elders receive additional integration supports. My parents secured employment shortly after arriving, and eventually they were able to buy a home for our family. After 1 year in the United States, refugees applied to become permanent residents. Around 5 years after arrival, they may apply to become American citizens. Refugees are your neighbors, business owners in your community, and your children's classmates. As for me, I am now a member of the Switchboard team. Every day, I help improve services that enable newcomers to thrive, just like me and my family. Thank you and welcome to everyone that just joined us. I'm going to ask a couple of questions. Please feel free to put your answers in the chat so everybody could see your answers. The first question is, what is one thing from the video that surprised you? Such a long process, how long it takes, how it works, the small percentage of people that are resettled, the length of the process, not knowing where you'll live, the number of organizations involved, the rigorous amount of security vetting that takes place in order to make this happen, the quick transition. Thank you. These are all great answers. Next question. What is one thing from the video that you were interested in learning more about? Housing for immigrants, access to healthcare for refugees, offering employment, how the organizations work together, documents needed for employment, how to support them. These are all great. Employment readiness process, how the refugee cap is decided, the programs kids are involved in, mental health services, the role of the caseworker, hiring opportunities for employers. These are wonderful. Many of the questions that you have, we have resources available on our Switchboard website. So if there's a specific topic that you are interested in, please go to our website and search for the topic. And we have downloadable resources, we have blog posts, and we have other training videos that are available on switchboardta.org. So next, I'd like to go over some key terms that we heard in the video. The first is refugee. So a refugee is a person who is outside his or her country and is unable or unwilling to return due to a well-founded fear of persecution based on race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. An asylee. People who received asylum are called asylees. Asylum is a legal status and a form of protection available to people who meet the definition of refugees and are already in the US or are seeking admission at a port of entry. People can apply for asylum regardless of their country of origin or current immigration status. The next one you've probably been hearing a lot, special immigrant visa or SIVs. A special immigrant visa or SIV is a type of visa that is granted to Iraqi or Afghan nationals who worked for or on behalf of the US government in Iraq or Afghanistan and met certain requirements. An SIV holder is eligible for the same Office of Refugee Resettlement, ORR, benefits and services and for the same time period as a refugee from the first day the SIV holder arrives in the US. The next term that you've been hearing a lot is parolee. Parolee is a temporary status allowing an individual to stay in the United States while applying for a longer-term solution. Presidential determination. This is probably another term you heard recently. Presidential determination is the number of refugees that will be approved for resettlement. Rebecca will drop the most recent federal statement regarding presidential determination in the chat. Many of the other terms mentioned in the video can be defined in the Who Are Refugees toolkit that accompanies this video. Rebecca will drop the link in the chat. Next slide. Next, I want to quickly go over some of the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program partners. These agencies include UN Refugee Agency, which is known as the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, or UNHCR. The Department of Homeland Security which houses the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS. The International Organization for Migration, or IOM. Within the Department of State, we have the Bureau of Populations, Refugee and Migrations, or PRM. And finally, within the Department of Health and Human Services, we have the Administration for Children and Families, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, or ORR, and the Center for Disease Control and Protection, or CDC. These organizations and more are defined in the toolkit that Rebecca has shared. Next, I would like to go over the populations expected in the next fiscal year that started on October 1st, 2021 through September 30th, 2022. The presidential determination, or PD, is set at 125,000 refugees. This number will include evacuees from Afghanistan, parolees, and special immigrant visa holders, or SIVs. You may have a lot of questions about people who have recently been evacuated from Afghanistan. Due to the emergency evacuation, the process used by the US government to evacuate these families was not the typical refugee resettlement process that you just learned about in our video. There are different types of protection available to people from Afghanistan, including special immigrant visas for those who worked with the US military and humanitarian parolee, a temporary status allowing a person to stay in the United States up to 365 days while applying for a longer-term solution. Today, we are focusing on the refugees who arrive through the typical resettlement process, but we will put some resources in the chat now to help you learn more about Afghan newcomers, including their different statuses and the program they are eligible for. The circumstances for these individuals are evolving quickly, so please keep in mind that the information may change. Stay tuned to federal resources for the latest information and ensure that you are subscribed to Switchboard's newsletter to learn more about future trainings that will focus specifically on Afghan newcomers. Next slide. Next, we will move on to the panel discussion. All of our panelists are either former refugees or asylees. Today's panelists are Suceska, who serves as the State Refugee Coordinator and Bureau Chief of the Iowa Bureau of Refugee Services. Next, we have Kaizah, who is a litigation paralegal at Steptoe and Johnson LLP. And finally, we have Khadra Bashir, who is a reception and placement manager at ECDC. Mak, would you like to jump on and tell us a little about yourself?
Sure, I would be more than happy to. Good afternoon to some of you and good morning to some of you as well. I presume we have some folks on the West Coast. As Rishan stated, my name is Suceska. I serve as the Bureau Chief for the Iowa Bureau of Refugee Services, as well as the State Refugee Coordinator through ORR for Iowa. It's really a pleasure and honor to be here today. I've been sharing my story a lot lately as the face of the face of the work that we're doing here in Iowa for refugees. I'm honored to be a part of this organization and honored to be a part of the greater network that is the state of Iowa in welcoming refugees with the long legacy that we've had for many years in welcoming newcomers to Iowa. So my refugee story started in the summer of 1993 in August. My family and I were originally resettled from Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina to Des Moines, Iowa. We've been living here ever since and have made Iowa our home. But my refugee story on a personal note really has to do with my growth and starting my life here in Iowa, not necessarily the experiences I had fleeing Sarajevo, going to a refugee camp in Croatia, and then finally making Iowa my home. I'm very fortunate to have parents and a family that knew English and had a little bit of familiarity with American culture before we were resettled here to Iowa. So our lives were a little different than maybe some of the stories you've heard or will come to know in the future. But for me, being a refugee and sort of having a dual identity as someone who grew up in the United States, but also really knew where my roots were, and my parents having the influence they did in making sure that my brother and I did not forget our culture, our home, and our roots, really prepared me well for the work that I do now and the community that I'm a part of. I'm honored to be leading the organization that has welcomed refugees to Iowa since 1975. I've used my identity and my experience as a white passing individual to really be that bridge between our refugee and immigrant communities, while also ensuring that the systems, mechanisms, and institutions we have in place are accessible through culturally and linguistically appropriate services and mechanisms for newly arrived refugees. So, using my story and experience, I've really learned to work with refugees on a more personal level, and being able to share my story while also understanding and empathizing the circumstances folks come with here to the state. As we go forward in the work that we are continuing to do, not only in supporting refugees, but also Afghan evacuees and SIVs, I think the experiences of established communities, particularly those refugees who have been here for some time, will really go a long way to welcome our new Iowans, as we say here in Iowa, but also our new Americans and our new neighbors. So very excited to be here. Looking forward to learning about the other panelists and answering any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Khine, go ahead. Take it away.
Hello, everybody. I'm Kaizah, and I am currently living in Maryland. And thank you, everyone, for coming to this webinar. And I am currently working as a paralegal at the Steptoe and Johnson. And I also work at the International Rescue Committee as an interpreter over there. So yeah, I currently 26 years old, and my family and me came to the US when I was in high school. So it's only like about 10 years ago. And we did have a lot of obstacles and struggles in the beginning when we came to the US. But I believe that opportunity that make us really mentally stronger. Because of the obstacles we had, we became mentally strong, and then we had a lot of good friends that time, even though we had like challenges. Because of the good friends, we were able to overcome our challenges. And now that I'm have a stable income and work, our family are able to give back to the community. And yeah, a lot of political issues are still going on in my country, Myanmar, but I'm glad that we are able to give back to the society. Although we had many challenges in the beginning, and we had to adjust American culture because it's totally different cultures. And yes, please, you are please feel to ask questions about asylum. Yes, that's about my story.
Thank you, Khine. Khadra, you share? You're muted. Khadra, you're muted.
Sorry. Again, hi. My name is Khatra Bashir, as Rishan said. I work for a resettlement agency as a resettlement program manager. And I just wanted to share my story today as a refugee from Somalia. My refugee story is not unlike any other story that have been told by so by so many people. We fled Somalia due to the war that was going on, went to Kenya as refugees, applied for the status as the video indicated, and we were resettled by the US. And that's not the only thing, as Mark was saying, that defines me, or that's not where my story stopped. So my siblings and I had to adapt to a culture that were new, and also preserve and maintain our culture and traditions, which were very important to my parents, and as an adult became very important to me as well. It's almost living in two different worlds, maintaining those two different cultures and traditions, and adapting. So I've been grateful to have community that's very welcoming and has helped me continue my traditions and grow as a person. And so, although the refugee story has been told by many people in different ways, we are, as the video indicated, we are your neighbors, we are your friends, we are your family. Yes, there were struggles in between that journey. However, that's not the only thing that defines us, nor is it where our story stops. I was able to be resettled in St. Louis, Missouri with my family and went to school there. I am currently living in Maryland, working, as I said, in a resettlement agency. I use my experience, my lived experience, to help the clients that I currently work for, because it brings an advantage that helps me understand what they're going through, the struggles, the parts where perhaps they're not adapting or acclimating as quickly as possible, or just understanding new things. I'm told about different stories from individuals. So it's great being here and being given an opportunity to show who and what refugees can do and are once they are in a new country, and they can thrive and become part of the makeup that is truly great, that makes up America. So yeah, my story may be unique to myself and my family members. However, it's shared by many. And I'm very grateful to bring that into my work and also into my experience every day. So thank you all for coming and hearing about our stories. And I look forward to telling you more about who I am, my journey, and any questions that you may have about Somalia.
Thank you, Mak, Khine, and Khadra. I told you guys I had great panelists selected for today. Okay, so we're going to start with the Q&A panel, and I'm going to start with a question that I'm going to ask all of you. So I'm going to say, Khine, you can start us off on this one. Okay, so the question is, we have discussed the legal definition of refugees throughout this webinar, but I would like to ask you, what do you want our audience to know about refugees?
Like, I have a lot of refugee friends, and I'm from the community where refugees are living. So I know that some of us, like, we didn't really want to leave the country at all. We wanted to stay at where we are, but we were faced a lot of like fears, and we were like forced to leave. And as an asylee, I'm not able to return. If I return back, I might I might have to go to the jail like that. So those are my my view about the refugees and asylees.
Thank you. Thank you, Khine. I'm going to go to Khadra next, but I want to touch on something that Khine said, that we don't necessarily want to leave our homes. So Khadra, can you share that quote?
Sure.
So and then tell us your answer.
Yes. There's a quote that I always share. It's by a Somali poet. Her name is Rishan, and it's called Home. And so it's a very long poem, but I'll just share the one that resonates with me, the one little line that resonates with me. It says, "No one leaves home unless home is in the mouth of a shark." You only run for the border when you see the whole city running as well. So no one wants to leave everything that they've ever known, you know? So you only leave when it's extremely hard for you to be safe and stay in an environment where you could be unsafe every day. And that quote from that poem resonates with me. You know, no one leaves unless home is the mouth of a shark. You know, no one chooses. I didn't choose to come to a new country, learn a new language, adapt to a new environment, learn a new culture. And so you only do that and put your family in extreme circumstances through the journey of becoming settled, or when it's extremely hard for you to maintain the life that you are used to in your country of birth. So that's my answer.
Thank you. And Mark?
Yeah, well, this goes without saying. And if you aren't aware, first and foremost, refugees are human beings. And there is a humanity to us that sometimes gets lost in political rhetoric and terminology and overall societal beliefs and fears that are presented and that bubble up with the unknown. And if somebody new is coming to our community, you know, what are we going to do? So I think what I want the audience to know, and I think the messaging and the way that we structure how we educate and build bridges between the refugee community and the welcoming communities, is that the humanity of refugees cannot be lost. So when we are talking about supporting refugees, when we are talking about integrating refugees, when we're talking about enriching our entire communities, at the basis of that is a humanity for all of us. Refugees come with stories, come with fears, come with successes, come with challenges, just like many of us do. So that piece that connects us is that human component. And understanding that, accepting that, and leading your lives by that notion will better prepare our systems, will better prepare our institutions, will better prepare all of us as we work together to help new arrived refugees, continue to support established communities, and prepare for the future. A lot of the work and a lot of the responsibility falls on grassroots efforts. We can worry about governments, we can worry about what policies will be released, but at the end of the day, it's the communities that refugees will be coming to, it's the communities that are already established that we need to take seriously and utilize as we continue to grow and thrive and survive together. I think sometimes this separation of refugee and everyone else is also at the forefront. Refugees are a part of our community. And I think that's important to remember as well as we go forward, that we are doing this together. There is no sense of separation, and the divisiveness that sometimes gets brought up, we lose the sight of that humanity. So if there was one point to take from this question, it would be the humanity and the face that refugees come with.
Thank you, Mark. And I just want to add that the refugee resettlement process is something that's been going on for many, many years and many, many decades. If you can trace your family lineage to someone from Germany who was a Lutheran that came through Ellis Island, then you also have a refugee origin story. So the refugee resettlement process is not something that started in the last 10 years or 20 years or even 30 years. This is something that's been going on for a really long time. And some very famous people are refugees. Albert Einstein was one of the most famous refugees, but it didn't just start. So the next question.
The three of us now, we're
And
famous too on this on this refugee webinar, of course.
That's right.
Exactly. I'm famous now, right?
The next question. What are some of the biggest challenges newcomers encounter? Khadra, I'm going to start with you on that one because you work in reception and placement.
Sure. I mean, with anything, imagine you moving to a new environment, a new place, just as a student. Let's say you're doing study abroad. There are a lot of things that you have to adapt to, right? Imagine that you don't have that safety net of a school, a family, a community. There's many challenges where refugees face not knowing the language, not knowing the community, not knowing the culture, not knowing the tradition. And they have to quickly adapt and provide for their family. So at times, those challenges could include not barriers to the English language, which requires for you to obtain a job, apply for a job. So there's many things that are challenging for refugees when they first get here. But it's great that there are resettlement agencies that are able to help them navigate that new process that they are unfamiliar with and help them with helping their kids apply for school or helping them apply for employment. So, but there's many challenges that they face, like other humans that are adapting to new environments and cultures.
Thank you. Mark, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I appreciate what Khadra shared with the overall, services that and general sort of culture shock that refugees face. I'm going to go a little bit more of a technical route and say paperwork. I used to do refugee resettlement for the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants as a reception and placement case manager. And that was a big challenge, not only for the service provider, but also for the refugee and newcomer themselves. Accessibility to different institutions and networks, or a lack of accessibility due to paperwork, forms not being translated, cumbersome, hard to navigate, difficult to understand, where then, that if that process on the front end is compromised, then public benefits take a long time to get processed, things get lost in the shuffle, people are they're left out to dry for lack of a better term. So I think the system and the institutions that we kind of work in is very complex. And it doesn't matter if you're in DC, LA, Chicago, or Des Moines, Iowa. Those systems aren't really set up for success, not only for non-native English speakers, but many mainstream folks as well. So I think that would be something that I would share if there's any advocates on this call or work within systems that can take anything back. I think accessibility, culturally and linguistically appropriate access to services and paperwork.
Right. No, I agree. I don't mean to jump in, but yeah, so just every time I apply for a new job, I always have a difficult time understanding the W-2. I've lived here for a long time. And so imagine me not understanding that when I've applied for jobs many times and I still have a hard time. So it's systems and paperwork is hard, period. And then for it to be not accessible or understandable to newcomers is difficult. So I agree with my panelist said.
Okay. Khine, would you like to answer? What are some of the biggest challenges newcomers encounter?
Yes, I agree with the language barriers because we came from a really different country, different cultures, and but although we have language barrier, there are services like, for example, like International Rescue Committee, like provide us with the language schools. Information to go to, like to get services from the language college, like courses. So yes, yes, I appreciate that. Though we have all those services out there, and yeah, I also want to add that we just take some time to overcome those challenges. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The next question, what led or inspired you to work with refugees? So, Mark, lead the way.
Sure. I appreciate that question. I kind of alluded to it in my opening statement, but for the main reason why I decided to go down this path is really, it's twofold. One, knowing that Iowans and Iowa welcomed so many refugees, including my family. So it was one way to give back. And secondly, knowing the struggle refugees face outlined by the responses that Khine and Khadra shared with resettlement, the challenges and barriers in sustaining economic mobility, access to resources, having someone who has a certain level of empathy and who has gone through that experience and is also a former refugee. The influence by my mom and my dad, who were former case managers for newly arrived refugees. The business kind of ran in the family, so to speak. There were just many factors from my personal experience that paved the way for me to be in this privileged and honored position I am today. So continuing to be a part of this network, continuing to be a part of the work that we do is just a certain calling, I think. On a selfish note, I say that, but on a more, I would like to present on a more altruistic note that it's really being there for people who don't have a voice, who may have challenges, and know that they have an ally in their corner and who also just happens to be a former refugee. So that's why I'm in this work, and I don't foresee leaving anytime soon.
Thank you. Khatra, would you like to answer?
Sure. I sort of fell into this line of work. I was an interpreter for hospitals and different agencies, a resettlement agency. And so, and I did that for a while, and I was asked if I wanted to be a mental health case manager, not even knowing what that was. And so I fell into it, and it's amazing work. I love what I do. And again, as I said, I bring an advantage that perhaps not a lot of people have. Sure, there are refugees, there are asylees, and there are immigrants, but not everyone has my story, right? I'm the eldest of 7 from Somalia. So I bring a unique perspective to my role that truly makes an impact on those that I serve every day. So it's amazing what I do, and I love doing it. And I believe that we should leave this world a little different than how we found it. And my job allows me or affords me that opportunity to do so. So yeah, I don't see me leaving it anytime soon either. But I'm just thankful to be on the other side and show that refugees are not one, like there are different facets to us, professionals, artists, creatives. So I want to show that, Thank you.
Thank you. Khine, would you like to answer?
Yes. So I think that since we were also refugees, asylees, so we went through this path before, and we know how it feels, and we understand that some people have trauma, they have they experience a really unique experience. So I think sometimes only people who went through the positions can understand their feelings. So it's we can also as we are helping others, we can also share our feelings, and it's more good for the communication also when we help other refugees and asylees.
Thank you. I'm going to take a moment to answer some of the questions from the Q&A box. So the question that was voted, that received the most votes, I'm going to read it. And it's by an anonymous attendee. The question is, there has been a lot of talk recently about helping Afghan refugees to assimilate. This rubs me the wrong way, but I am struggling to explain why. Can you speak to assimilation and whether it is helpful or harmful to refugees?
Who do you want to start?
Right.
You want me to- I can start. I can answer that. I can, from my perspective. I think that the theory and word of assimilation is probably an outdated as we talk about integration more so. So I think assimilation for some of older generations may be a familiar term in how we wanted to integrate refugees and what the goals were for refugees arriving in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But as we gain more social awareness and what the purpose of resettlement programs are, how we establish a sustainable infrastructure, and how we really provide the best opportunities for non-native English speakers, which include refugees and immigrants, we want to talk about integration. So we want to respect and honor the cultures and communities and heritages of refugees and immigrants, which they bring here to the United States and respectively to all 50 states across the country, while also understanding that the system that is in place may be challenging to change. It's an incremental process. And so balancing the system at play and also understanding with who are the recipients of that system, it's more of a play of integration. So what are we, when we talk about accessibility, when we talk about paperwork, what are we doing within the system and in the systematic framework to provide translated documents, provide access to interpreters, have more of a welcoming sort of system that will allow better for that integration. What are we doing when we're working with employers, when we're working with the banking system, when we're working with home lenders, public transportation, schools? Are we maintaining the respect of the families of what they bring regarding their heritage and cultures, while also providing an opportunity for them to grow, survive, and thrive? So how that has shifted from before to now is assimilation is a little outdated, and we try not to use that anymore. We focus on integration because we want every culture, every background is unique and welcome within our communities. We don't necessarily want everyone looking the same, talking the same, doing the same things, but functioning together in a symbiotic, cohesive sort of society. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Mark. I'm just going to jump in and say that my family did come to the United States in 1984, where assimilation was the big word. So we want to be assimilate very quickly. But I didn't lose my culture. I didn't, for me, it was more like a hat that I put on, and I had to be American at certain times, and I had to be Eritrean depending on the place I was at and the things that I was doing. But that kind of led me to the work that I do now, that to help make it more of an integration rather than an assimilation. So Khadra, you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah, I think we get stuck on words, sure, assimilation, integration, they mean similar things. I think we lose focus on access to services. It could be as small as welcoming communities, and I feel like that has changed again since my family came into the US in the 90s. But it's also an ever evolving thing, because as new communities come to the US, we are learning about them. And so there are so many different resources out there where you can learn about different cultures, different communities, different populations that are coming. So I feel like sometimes we just get lost in the word. I feel like we should focus on who we are, the humans that are coming in. That's my main focus, not necessarily the words that we are using to describe to get used to our new home.
One more question. How can individuals support and volunteer with refugees?
That's a good question. I'll start.
Yeah,
So,
go.
thank you. So there are many ways, right? I am not representing the organization that I work for. However, all RAs are looking for the same or similar assistance. You could be a volunteer. There's monetary donation. There are different ways that you can help welcome a new community. And all the different RAs have a website where it directs you to the different ways that you can help. Again, volunteers are a lot for us. It's very helpful. There are some that help us with the apartment setup. There are some that donate specific items to clients. There are some that provide additional support. It may be tutoring, more tutoring for the individual or the family members. So there's so many ways that you can volunteer, and the different organizations, the different RAs have more information on their websites. And I'm sure Rishan and Rebecca will share.
Mark, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think there are a multitude of ways folks can help support refugees, while also understanding that in this current time and probably going forward, resettlement agencies and those who are on the front lines will be inundated with support, will be inundated with information on requests on how faith-based organizations, concerned citizens, volunteers can help and want to help, and I think that's great. But to be clear, I think there has to be a balance and understanding that there has to be sort of a structured and thoughtful approach in how we support refugees, knowing what is already available out there, understanding where the gaps are, and which each service provider or individual agency institution fills that gap with a specific role they may have. On a broader spectrum, I think Khadra hit the nail on the head. Reach out to your local state refugee coordinator's office, your local resettlement agency, identify local ethnic community-based organizations. Just share that you are there, share that you are willing to help, and let them sort of work with you in tandem on where those services and supports may need. So the services and resources refugees will need are going to be available. For my office in particular, we've had an outpouring of support from state government to legislators to businesses and stakeholders, citizens, and everyone and anyone. Some have come out of the woodwork, but that's okay. We're gathering as much information as we can. A lot of the times we kind of let people know, just kind of stand by, stay tuned. We're developing what we need. We're going to identify where those gaps are and reach back out to you. But mostly really reaching out to your local agencies, finding out what they need from either materials, bedding, pots and pans, or just cash donations. That would be the route that I would recommend.
And then just to add to what everyone else was saying, there's a lot of interest now because of the current situation in Afghanistan, but understand that refugees are coming every year and immigrants and asylees need help every year. So once this attention dies down, we always need the help. So continue to support your local RAs and nonprofit organizations once there are no interest in what's going on.
I would just one thing, and when I arrived to the US, I didn't really understand English, so just being like kind and having patience with them is the best way to help them, I believe.
Thank you, Khine. I do want to acknowledge that we did receive questions about how to hire refugees in the registration. We do have resources on Switchboard. If you are here with an organization that would like to hire refugees, Rebecca can drop in the chat a link to a switchboard resource that we have that lets you know the type of documents that refugees have and about working. Another thing that I want to bring attention to is we did have a lot of questions about refugees and trauma. This is also another topic that we have a lot of resources on Switchboard. Rebecca can drop a link on that in the chat as well. So I do encourage you to go to our website and look at the resources that we have, and I'm sure that you can find an answer to something that you're looking for. If you don't see the resources, you can always reach out to us and let us know it's something that you want to know more about. So that's going to conclude our question and answer section of the webinar. Thank you, Mak. Thank you, Khadra. Thank you, Khine. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. These are the learning objectives you saw in the beginning of the webinar. And I'd like to take a moment to ask that you complete the Switchboard feedback survey. This survey will ask you if you have achieved these learning objectives today, and it takes less than 1 minute. It is incredibly helpful for us to improving our trainings going forward. Rebecca's dropping the link in the survey into the chat now, and depending on how you joined the webinar, it may already be open in your browser. Next, as I previously mentioned, we have created a toolkit that accompanies today's training, which is available on the Switchboard website. Rebecca is dropping the link to that resource and others listed on this slide, and you will receive them via email. Working on this project and facilitating this webinar has been one of the greatest honors in my life. It is my hope that the information presented today gave you a better understanding of the refugee resettlement process. If you have learned something by attending, please share the video and join us in raising awareness for the plight of refugees. And finally, here is the Switchboard contact information. I hope that you do and will stay in touch with us and joining us for future trainings. Thank you again for watching and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are we staying on?